Thank you for joining us today for our Cultural Humility Pro Bono training through Children's Law Center. My name is Jen Massey. I'm the Pro Bono Director at Children's Law Center. And joining me today, we have Stella Aloyede, our Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Talent at Children's Law Center. This is our roadmap for today's training. I will briefly talk a little bit about our Pro Bono program, since that's why we're here. We're going to dig into the topic of this training, cultural humility. We'll end with some practice tips that are sort of infused throughout the training, and then some key takeaways at the end. Children's Law Center's Pro Bono program. So if you're new to Children's Law Center, I know we have a lot of folks who are joining us live today who are existing partners, and I thank you for being here and partnering with us. As you already know, we are serving over 5,000 children and families each year, and doing that with the assistance because of the assistance that we have of hundreds of pro bono lawyers. We're fighting so each child in DC can grow up with a loving family, good health, and a quality education. The areas of work and places that we are looking for pro bono help, where pro bono help really makes a difference in our clients and families' lives, they fall in family health and education. So I'm going to talk about these areas of work when we dig into the concept of culturally humble representation today. Supporting pro bono attorneys. So we are ensuring that we're screening our cases for pro bono placement. We're thinking about trainings like this one, as well as content area trainings that are really digging into the legal law and practice. We are, of course, having a lot of materials available so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And we offer mentoring. So we have attorneys who are practiced, experienced, tenured in the work, and able to provide you guidance from the beginning of the case through the end of the case. Those on-demand resources, some of them that we offer, you can find right on our website. If you go to childrenslawcenter.org, you'll see pro bono. We've highlighted it pretty clearly here at the bottom of the page. And this pro bono landing page includes different links on the right-hand side, so you can find some of those resources that I just referenced. So cultural humility, before we dig in, I want to first just note that Children's Law Center used to hold trainings on this topic similarly, but called it cultural competency. And we made an intentional shift to cultural humility a little over maybe a couple of years ago. And the reason that we did that is we thought through what competency might suggest, thinking about the ability to become competent in another culture, and could potentially suggest finite learning, where we think that the issue that we're discussing is really about lifelong learning. And so the concept as we discuss it, and our intention around the use of cultural humility, is to think about that lifelong learning concept and how we can't be the expert in another person's culture, and of course including our clients as we're thinking about lawyering. The definition that we have at Children's Law Center when we're considering cultural humility is the process and practice of increasing self-awareness concerning both implicit and explicit biases. This has a couple of prongs here for both learning and unlearning. So it's learning about other cultures outside of our own, and it's unlearning stereotypes that impede our ability to genuinely engage with another person. Why are we addressing this? So the pro bono attorneys who are helping us with cases, new pro bono attorneys who are going to begin partnering with us and working with clients, you play such a critical role. Our families are facing various legal issues impacting the child's family, health, or education, and legal expertise and the ability to navigate legal systems and processes is absolutely critical. It makes a huge difference. But what we have to acknowledge, and what we're stressing in our conversation today, is that we're each bringing something to this partnership and to this attorney-client relationship. So as the lawyer, I'm bringing my race, my culture, my life experiences, and how this shapes how I may have biases, interpret information, and ultimately how I engage with my client and the family. And then likewise, the clients bringing their race and culture and life experience, and they are the expert in that. And so we're bringing these things together, and this is what helps us achieve a positive outcome, acknowledging both of these things. So very brief goals. We're going to talk about cultural humility a little bit more, kind of unpacking what it looks like going through the practice, and we're going to share some of those tips. But this is what I would love to have everyone meet our Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Talent, Stella Aloyede, if you haven't met her before, and she's going to talk about our grounding norms for this session.
Thank you, Jen. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this cultural humility and pro bono training. We are going to establish some grounding norms because this is an interactive training. So the first thing we want to do is encourage active participation. We have a couple of polls, some chat function features, as well as some self-reflection that we are encouraging everyone to participate in whatever form of engagement feels right and comfortable for you. But we do want to maintain an inclusive training environment that allows people to have a variety of opportunities of getting to know the people on this call, but also a little bit more about themselves in the process.
Okay, so as we think about what cultural humility entails, thank you so much for that, Stella. And we're hoping to engage everyone who's watching this on demand as well, and really just reflecting and in this together. So kind of leads me to this lifelong learning section. We're all doing this. So it is a critical self-assessment, self-awareness, really thinking through our life experiences and how they're shaping everything. So everyone is a complex, multi-dimensional human being. We are all pretty unique in terms of how our culture and life experiences are informing our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions, and our interactions. And so we've got to take a look at ourselves. And when it comes to our clients, again, acknowledging that they are the experts in their lives. I want to be able to help on that legal issue, but what does that really mean to the client? And respecting that there may be difference there. You know, working as a white attorney, I may not share the race and culture and life experiences of my clients. And it's really critical that I'm listening and engaging in the learning process, checking for understanding and really respecting my clients' life experiences and family system. And then Stella is going to talk about the accountability piece, which is critical as well.
Yes, the accountability around cultural humility is what actually makes the internal process of learning and unlearning external, and it creates community through accountability. So what does that mean? Responsibility. When we are talking about lawyering people who are not in the same cultural experiences or community as ours, we want to make sure that we are having space to be responsible for our own understanding of their world and their lives without taking away any type of power and ability for our clients to make decisions for themselves. So we want to encourage that people hold themselves accountable to the way they show up and represent on their clients' behalf by sharing responsibility, not overstepping boundaries, asking for clarification and permission where necessary. But then we also move into intentionality, because apart from asking and creating shared responsibility, you want to be intentional about how you're engaging with your clients. You want to make sure that the things that you are saying are being cognizant, that they're not teetering into something that can be considered racist or bigoted or sexist or classist. So we're bringing ourselves into the awareness that we have these different type of isms that are at play in our society and that actually come into our dynamics with our clients and our client work. And the last thing is consideration. You will have the opportunity to experience myriad type of cases with your clients who come from different backgrounds and circumstances from your own, but also from each other. So always considering how much your client is bringing and how much they are also experiencing in the world while you're engaging with them is extremely important, because from there you're able to learn them as a person and not just as another person who is a client alone. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Stella. As we think about everything that we both just said, and we're here to talk about culturally humble representation, who are we representing? Who are our clients? So the families that we are serving, we're serving predominantly Black and Brown children, parents, and caregivers who are living in poverty in the District of Columbia. You'll see here there's a concentration in boards 7 and 8. And we're going to talk about the importance of the intersection between race and poverty. And there's a lot that we're going to cover today. And of course, there's so much that we're not going to cover. But we do want to highlight this intersection. And I'm going to just shift right back to Stella to talk about some key definitions as we're thinking about this.
The intersection, can everyone hear me? Wonderful. The intersection of race and poverty incorporates a lot of factors, a lot of systemic issues, but the top one would be systemic racism. And the definition of systemic racism that we'll be using today is the policies and practices entrenched in established institutions which result in the exclusion or promotion of designated racial groups. We are also covering anti-Black racism and how anti-Black racism informs race and poverty in the district, in Maryland, Virginia, but also in the way we practice with one another. The intentional devaluation and exclusion of Blackness that is formed by voiding Blackness of its value, while also systematically marginalizing Black people and their issues. It speaks to the unique ways in which discrimination, violence, and harm is imposed upon and specifically impacts Black people. And as Jen mentioned earlier about the intersection and why it's important, we want to identify and define the word intersectionality, the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group. These key definitions help us frame our understanding that our clients are not different just because they are Black or they are brown, and it is not the matter of there is nothing that we can do to solve or do anything different to be anti-racist. These definitions are allowing us to understand that there are systems at play, especially within the legal system, that we are also contributing to. But if we are aware of how much people bring into the cases and their clients and their lives, you can also understand how the system has been impacting them in a way that marginalizes them more than a white counterpart.
Thank you, Stella. This sort of intersection leads us to the graphic that you see before you. So we have a number of issues impacting families on this screen. And this is something that I can't really overemphasize in the work and the clients that we're serving. So you'll see racism and poverty listed here. You'll also see trauma and housing and health and disability and a number of factors, a number of issues. And so these are common in the families that we're serving, who we're serving. We're going to see things show up on a daily basis. So when we're thinking structurally around racism and poverty, that's impacting our families on a daily basis. It's impacting daily functioning, so many things. And of course, there are a lot of examples that we could include on this slide that aren't here, like food scarcity, availability of health insurance, just the overall impact that these things can and do have on our client families' health, well-being, ability to thrive. And what isn't listed here that we also know living during the pandemic is the disproportionate impact of COVID on communities of color. And so there are so many things on this slide, yet there's so many things that aren't even listed here. And the point is that there are a lot of issues our families are facing. And when we're meeting our clients where they are, we have some of these things on a daily basis that are arising, and some things that might come up more as a priority and require more of our clients' attention, or they may choose to spend more of their attention on that issue, depending on what it is. So as an example, maybe we are working with a family around an education issue, and it is compelling and it is important. However, during that engagement, then housing stability may become a factor, and that may become the more urgent need. Our families may have to shift. We may have to shift. And so all of this is very real. How it shows up for any client, it's going to depend on that client. And so that really gets into the client expertise of their own life and what our case, legal issue, et cetera, may mean to them at any given point at the beginning of the representation and throughout.
And that leads us into our invisible knapsack exercise. If you were able to look at the pre-work that was emailed to you yesterday, you would have seen an activity by Dr. Peggy McIntosh called the invisible knapsack. And what we asked for everyone to do is depending on your race, answer the questions about your experience with privilege. As Jen just mentioned, there are all of these factors that are influencing the way our clients show up in their cases, but also in their lives and in the world. And the purpose of the invisible knapsack exercise was to have you focus in on what were your experiences with privilege and your environment's influence on you. And so right now we're going to go into a couple of polls in which, based off of your answers to the inventory, to the knapsack exercise, will dictate the way the conversation goes. So I am launching the first poll, which asks, how many items did you mark off as having experienced as a privilege? If you could please answer the poll right now. We will give everybody about 30 seconds. Okay, we have 10 more seconds for any final voters. Okay. Thank you for everyone who participated in the poll. So as we can see, we have an even split of, I haven't really experienced as many things as privilege that are on the inventory, all the way to I've experienced most, if not all of these things from a privileged position. And I would like to pose this question to the group, and feel free, if you are not comfortable speaking audibly, to type in the chat. What exactly were the things that were going through your mind when you were realizing, I cannot mark off as many of these things as being an experience of privilege, or I could mark off many of these things as an experience of privilege? So if you would like to put any thoughts into the chat, feel free to do that. I am going to stop sharing this poll right now and get into our next one. So we just talked about what we experienced as a privilege, but now, how many items did you mark off as never having experienced as a privilege? This is specifically to our participants of color who may have looked at this activity from a different lens. And Michaela, I see your comment, and as people are voting, I am going to read it out if you do not mind. Intersectionality, privilege by race but not gender. And that's a powerful statement, right? Because what you're speaking to is how there is something called gendered racism, right? And how you can, as a woman of color, experience both the racism of being non-white, but also the sexism of not being a man. Thank you so much for your vulnerability in that. I am ending the poll so that we can see the results. So I see that a majority of participants on this call, or on this training, excuse me, understand that they have never experienced a lot of the things in the invisible knapsack as a privilege. And I would appreciate if you would be willing to put into the chat just your thoughts about not experiencing the things that Peggy McIntosh has. Gary, I see your comment about being lucky to be in the white middle class upbringing. And that's an awareness that you should hold on to, because class privilege matters just as much as race privilege, just as much as gender privilege. And recognizing how the intersections of your privileges, and as they stack on top of each other and they compound with one another, affect the way you view the world, right? Versus a majority of our clients who may not be experiencing the exact same things as you, or have the exact same privileges as you, and how are they navigating through the same society in a different way? So these are some of the results from the second poll about how many people have never experienced some of the things as a privilege. And we can see that there are people who are across the spectrum with a heavy emphasis on a lot of people who have not experienced it. And finally, our last question for this section. Which feelings initially rose to the top while doing this activity? If you don't feel like your feelings are mentioned in the poll questions, please feel free to list them in the chat. But what were you feeling as you were going through the invisible knapsack? I love the diversity of answers that I'm seeing already. And if there's anybody while voting is going on that would be willing to take themselves off of mute and speak to their answers, that is more than welcome as well. We're still getting a couple votes in. Okay, I'm ending the poll at this moment. Do we have any volunteers to speak to their experience doing the activity? Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I appreciate the honesty within the way people voted. Thank you, Deborah. If it's Deborah, I apologize. How unfair my privilege is, how I did not recognize how broad it is. That is a statement that I am going to have to, I do not want to make my own inferences from your statement, but I do welcome you to expound upon that, Deborah, if you so wish.
Yeah, just
thank you.
Realizing how many of these privileges I have, and just most of them, and also not having even thought about these things as privileges, not having thought about whether, you know, I would be welcomed in a hotel. I mean, it just doesn't even come to my thought process, and that was sort of my response.
Thank you so much for your honesty. Thank you for expounding upon your thought. And that's how privilege works, right? It becomes the norm for you. No one tells you you have the privilege, or no one tells you that you are privileged until you recognize how there are people who don't share the same experiences as you. So a lot of times, and I'm not saying, Deborah, this is how you voted, but a lot of times when that newfound awareness is presented, a lot of guilt and shame is wrapped up and entangled in that because you are unaware. And I see how Michaela wrote that they feel enlightened, so helpful to get this reframe and see examples of privilege I was not aware of. And the purpose of the activity, thank you for that comment, was not to bring people into a place of self-loathing and regret and shame and guilt, but to let you be aware that we all experience this world from spaces of privilege and marginalization, right? And it is through the exercise of seeing how the world is different for different people, for people of color, for women, for trans people, non-binary people. Let's run the gamut of different identities. How does that affect and influence the way we come into our cases with our clients? Our clients come into cases with us. Are we recognizing that each individual brings their own unique perspective? And are we being humble enough to recognize that the culture that I do not understand is not for me to judge, but is for me to learn? I thank you all. Oh, Melody, I have to shout you out because I see a powerful comment from you. It is a reminder of how one without privileges must orient their children to have fewer expectations than do those who have such privileges. And I don't want to expound upon your already profound thought, but I do want to create this space for you to do so if you so like.
I think this highlighted for me how frequently I've had to teach my children about the world from such a sort of negative perspective. And so this is just really powerful because I had not really thought about the many ways in which I have prepared them to have fewer expectations and to expect to have to work harder than other children do.
And though I see your profile picture, I don't want to assume that you are a Black woman, but that's what I see. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So as a Black woman, recognizing how you have had to orient your children to exist in this world, and we work with Black and Brown families and Black and Brown children, and thinking about how just by their very sheer existence of being Black children in America during the pandemic, for instance, living in poverty to compound upon that, how does that then frame our adult clients or the parents of our children clients to have to consider how they teach and frame their children to engage with other people? And this isn't to bring shame. I want to be very, very explicit about that, but it's to bring the awareness that we are orienting our children based off of their race, based off of their gender, their ability and disability, and so on and so forth, in such different ways. And that does not exclude sexual orientation and identification as well. Thank you all for participating. I hope you got as much out of this activity as I did.
Thank you so much, Stella. Everything that has just been discussed, I want to thank you for leading us in that exercise, and I want to thank everyone who participated and joined in and spoke up. We appreciate it so much. I think I'm still seeing the poll results listed, and we might be closing out of those. Are you closing out of the poll, Stella?
Yeah, it's to go to the next slide.
Okay, it's ready to go. So just shifting over to poverty, we have some guidelines listed here just to think about what are some brief statistics that we might share. If you look here at a family of 4, we're looking at $26,200 a year for a family of 4. So if you're $27,000 a year, that's not technically poverty for a family of 4, which I think we can all sit with that and imagine what that really means, and how could you possibly meet every need that you have for your family, for a family of 4 with that particular figure. So in DC, 1 in 5 DC residents are living in poverty, and that's 1 in 4 children. I've included a couple of other statistics here. These do tie to some of the work in particular that we do. The second one, when you're looking at 1 in 5 DC children living with asthma, the disparity between the Northwest and Southeast quadrants is a 10-fold difference. And so we see that in our work, in particular in the housing conditions cases that we do. Families are living in conditions that are literally making them sick. It's sending kids to the doctor, to urgent care, emergency room, and this may impact just the ripple effect on the family. So that might mean missing out on school, work. Missing out on work might mean losing a job, for clients not having flexibility in their line of appointment. So that is something that is definitely a really critical portion of this slide for the work that we're doing with families in DC and the housing arena in particular. But again, we might be working on a different issue. It could be about family law, it could be about education, and still this may be an issue on the client's plate, right? So at least 5,000 DC children having unmet mental health needs. So we're thinking about this ripple effect. We may have higher risks and incidents of trauma, the impact on daily functioning that we mentioned earlier, and then the reliance on public systems. And so what we see time and time again with our client families is extreme difficulty in navigating these systems just through getting yourself on the phone, being able to get a form completed, being able to access benefits, things that you are entitled to receive, but just the process being incredibly difficult to navigate, and not actually having adequate services. And so again, we're back to those unmet mental health needs and that ripple effect. This brings us also to the concept of scarcity. And so there's a book that we quote on this slide, Scarcity, Why Having Too Little Means So Much. If you haven't read it, I certainly recommend it. There's a scarcity mindset that is covered in this book, and it's really thinking about what is your mindset when you're thinking that you don't have enough. And for our client families living in poverty, scarcity is not going away. And so limitations around finances, mental bandwidth, and time are really critical. And you see tunneling listed here. So there, if we think back to that graphic of so many different issues that families may be facing and juggling, many of them at one time, you are forced to make decisions among and between really critical areas in your life and your family's life. And so you may have to sacrifice one important need for something else that became more urgent, or may just be the result of the tunneling experience that you have. And so just ending this slide, I think this quote is worth mentioning. We are emphatically not saying that poor people have less bandwidth, quite the opposite. We are saying that all people, if they were poor, would have less effective bandwidth. And now Stella's going to offer another perspective that's critical to our understanding of this concept, and certainly as our work as lawyers.
Yes, yes. So while Jen just spoke about the type of scarcity mentality and mindset that our clients are forced to adopt because of poverty, I want to also bring scarcity mindset from the lens of an attorney in judgment towards your clients, right? So just because our clients are experiencing poverty, experiencing some type of systemic racial issue that is going against them does not mean that they are inadequate or incapable of making the best decisions for their lives. And it's important that we maintain a culturally humble posture when engaging with our clients by remembering that they are a part of a system that was not set up or even created to support them effectively, right? And so as the attorney that is advocating with them, partnering with them, it's the mentality to maintain of the world has made their life experiences scarce. And if life was different for them, how abundant would their experience in this world be? And as their attorney in this moment, how can I be a part of making what is scarce abundant in their lives and not withholding the power from them to be able to make those judgments for themselves? Because our clients are the best experts on their lived experiences as well as their bandwidth and limitations.
Thank you. And that ties into some discussion we're going to have about representing our clients and thinking particularly about stated interest representation, where really the client is the boss, right? So let's talk about those cases at Children's Law Center. What does cultural humility look like in practice? Let's talk through, because all the things that we're discussing, they really matter, and they're showing up in all of the work that we're doing. We are going to divide this discussion up between the type of representation because that matters. Is it best interest? Is it stated interest? So very briefly, we do work at Children's Law Center and through our pro bono partnership with many of you, representing the best interest of a child. It's the attorney's role to definitely work with that child, and what that child thinks is best in their opinion is very important. But your recommendation is about what do you think is best? These are cases around custody that we'll talk about in just a moment. And then the stated interest representation. So we want to be mindful of the client being the boss and driving the representation. What is their goal? What do they want to see happen? And remembering the power, the choice, the agency that they have, respecting that. And ultimately, that's just critical to being able to meet their goals. So taking these in turn, best interest representation. So our custody guardian ad litem case is a great example of this work. And we are here in the district facing, a calendar at DC Superior Court where there isn't a right to a lawyer. 80 to 85% of litigants are going up unrepresented. Parents are in high conflict around custody and visitation, who makes decisions about a child. And judges are reaching out to us saying, we need a lawyer to help us make a really important decision about a child's life. Where are they going to live? Who's going to decide where they go to school? And this lawyer's role is to make a recommendation and participate and advocate in the case to say, what is in this child's best interest? So let's go through a very brief case study. Again, every family is different, every case is different, whatever the issues may be. But I'm going to read something here, and these are issues that we see in many of these cases. So we're going to do some reflection in this section. You're the guardian ad litem, GAL, for Nicole, who's 5 years old, and her parents disagree about custody. Nicole lives with her mother in temporary housing. Her mother alleges that Nicole's father is abusive and should not have visits with Nicole. Nicole's father alleges that Nicole's mother does not adequately supervise Nicole, and he is concerned for Nicole's safety. So I'm going to ask you, if you're watching this on demand, to do some reflection on your own. Those of you joining us live to do the same, but also feel free to participate in the chat if you would like. My first question is, what race is this family? My second question is, well, let's answer that one. It doesn't say, does it? But what is coming to mind, right? What is popping up in our mind? And then the related question then is, why do you think, whatever came to mind when I asked that question of what race is this family, what came to mind? Why do you suppose that was initially what you thought of what popped up for you? And then related to that, what are some assumptions that you might have made that were underneath that assignment, if you will, if you were assigning a race to this family when thinking through this case study? So these are some questions to think about. Some other questions to think about. So I just read through exactly what was written on this screen. And so another opportunity for self-reflection or participating in the chat or coming off mute if you'd like. I want to ask you to think about the words that have popped for you in some way. So I read these different things out about this child and her circumstances and her family. What popped out for you? What words or phrases were you making meaning of in a positive way, in a negative way? Did you find yourself thinking, I'm concerned about that? Did you find yourself having any sort of judgment concerns about parenting? Again, thinking about what your role might be in this case as a guardian ad litem. And I'll say, when we get cases, the judges send over referrals and they write things up that look like this. And there may be a lot of questions that we may have. And we're all having our biases and assumptions that we're bringing to everything. And so that includes judges, that includes everyone. And so what might we be having questions about here? What do we know? What do we not know? But really checking our thoughts and doing some reflections here. And what this really brings us to is examining our biases. And so that's part of this discussion. And so we all have them. How are we perceiving and interpreting information? This is something our brain is doing. It's happening every time we're observing someone, if we're engaging with them over the phone, seeing them parenting their child during a visit, reading something from the court. You know, we need to identify what biases we may have. And so for this example, what may have come up for you? So just another moment to kind of think. And I think, you know, something that I've even learned, right? There's a lot of learning I've done from Stella, and so much enjoy partnering and learning together with her. It's not just saying bias or, you know, check our bias, but being really specific, because there are so many different types of bias. And I think tying that to, again, a lesson learned from Stella, the accountability piece. You know, is there a racial bias here? Is there a class bias here? Is there something in these cases where it's all about family? Am I bringing up how I was raised? You know, if you're a parent, are you thinking about how you parent? Something in the environment? There are so many different things that may arise. And it's about knowing that that's going to happen. and then really examining them because they are influencing how we interpret information and ultimately what we're assuming about people, what we might think about parents in our cases, and their ability to parent, as well as what we think may be appropriate or preferable. So this just kind of fleshes out how the impact is very real for bias. So if this is at play in how we're interpreting a child's life and family and the behaviors of their parents, that's going to impact what we recommend in the case as the lawyer doing a best interest recommendation. And that recommendation is critical. What guardian ad litem attorneys are representing as a best interest custodial arrangement, it is given a lot of weight. It's highly valued. And so that is impacting the child's life. You're playing a big role working with the parties, working with the child, and working with the court. And so these things matter because this is where we're leaving our families, and we've got to think about that. We do not want it to inadvertently be about us. So some ongoing reflections, things I think about in these cases. What am I finding credible? Who am I finding credible? Do I think someone's lying to me? Why do I think that? What is the basis for it? And then tap into some of that lawyerly stuff that we have going on in our brains. What would evidence be if I needed to put this on? Is this something in my gut that I really couldn't, have a witness to bring in to speak to? If I have concerns about parents and their parenting ability, there's got to be a nexus. Whatever the allegation is or whatever the investigation might be about, what's the nexus to parenting and the impact on this child? It is not always there, and so that is critical. And ultimately, it's centering around this family. So at the end of the day, these cases resolve by getting an order that speaks to a custodial arrangement for the child. I want it to work for that child. I want us to be able to end the case and know that we've got something that's going to work for this child's family, for their circumstances, and respecting their culture and their life experiences and realities. So that's guardian ad litem work. That's best interest representation. When we switch over to stated interest representation, I'm going to go ahead and just briefly go through the 3 different types of cases that we practice and place pro bono that are stated interest. So caregiver custody, we represent a lot of grandparents and kin who are caregivers of children who may be at risk of entering the foster care system if their family, their biological parents may not be able for whatever reason to care for them safely. We represent those housing conditions. I've already talked about this, working with families to get repairs and seek court oversight and file complaints as needed to ensure that unsafe conditions in homes are addressed. And then special education. So we're working with parents of children with special needs who are lacking in services and supports that they need to make progress in school. So without focusing in on a case type, let's do a case study just thinking about culturally humble representation in a stated interest capacity. So here you represent Miss H in a pro bono case. You have not connected with her recently. She did not attend your last scheduled meeting. You have left 2 voicemail messages, but not heard back. You started working with Miss H because you think her case is important and you want to help her with the legal issues impacting her family. So let's take another moment to reflect here in this case study and think about when you don't hear from Miss H, when she doesn't respond to you, what are your thoughts? And so take a minute for yourself. If you'd like to put anything in the chat, feel free to do that as well. And this is where we're sort of thinking about, what might be coming up for you? What are the thoughts that you might be having? What might you be assuming about not hearing back from this client or not having them at the last meeting? You might also be thinking about the feelings that arise when you're even thinking about these thoughts. Oh, I thought maybe she doesn't care about this case, or maybe this just isn't important to her. And then you might think, well, gosh, how do I know that? And so it's important to think whatever your thoughts are, to examine them, and again, kind of checking through what bias you might be bringing to that, assumptions that you might be making, kind of checking what you know or don't know. Because let's flash forward and just say, let's consider later we connect and we learn some information that is telling to the experience that we were having around contact and client engagement. So maybe you later learn that meeting that Miss H missed, she couldn't afford it in a couple of ways. She couldn't afford it in money. She had limited money budgeted out, something came up. It could have been food scarcity. It could have been an increase in metro fare. It could have been a lot of things. It could also have been time. If you are relying on public transportation, it can take a while to get around to appointments. And again, scarcity may be at play, often is at play, and then having to make sacrifices among urgent needs and important matters. You may also hear, okay, you called, you left some messages, but she was out of minutes. So it's also being willing to, have an open mind about what communication looks like. It may look very different for pro bono clients versus paid clients. Our clients may not have unlimited minutes. They may need to save them for emergencies or may run out at the end of the month, for example. There are a whole host of client realities that could be at play. I think the point here is really thinking through what might be happening and checking the thoughts that you're having and what meaning you're making of things. Ongoing reflection here, again, thinking through the biases and how they're impacting the relationship. Going right back to where we started, the client's goals. Do I understand them? And, this really gets to a place of thinking through what the legal issue means for your client. There may be non-legal issues that are really important to your client or related to this matter. We might be thinking through our legal lens, and it's very different than how the legal issue is really perceived and experienced by the client. And so we've got to get clear on what they want and not take for granted that we're thinking, oh, you've got this issue and this shouldn't be happening, or there's this legal process and I'm going to help you through it. We really need to sit and understand and ask for understanding. And if you don't understand, that's okay. I think a powerful thing of this culturally humble representation we're hoping to provide is getting comfortable with not knowing and being able to say that and being able to ask questions and really listen with an open mind and learn. And then of course, we're back to scarcity and things that I've already discussed. And so these things are very interrelated, and some of them are already practice tips. So I'm going to turn it back to Stella to engage around practice tips from those components that we outlined several slides back at the beginning about cultural humility. Thank you, Stella.
Thank you, Jen. I'm a fan of you too. So when we're talking about practice tips, we are not just talking about things for you to keep in the back of your mind of consideration, but for you to actually engage in practicing, right? And the first one is lifelong learning. There will be mistakes along the way, right? There will be bumps in the road. And when I was talking about releasing yourself from guilt and shame, I meant it because when you're going through the self-reflection of how to become a more culturally aware and then consequently a more culturally humble individual, you will get to this point where your self-awareness brings you back to that invisible knapsack moment that you had earlier of saying, what was I not aware of before? What do I need to know? And how can I actually move forward? The more you keep that mentality of curiosity around culture and around understanding and learning the things that you did not know before, the better you'll be able to actually meet your client where they are as a human being, right? You want to maintain the humanity of your relationship with them through lifelong learning and checking your negative, implicit, and explicit biases against the client population, as well as lived experiences on your end and theirs. That leads me to the next part of client expertise. I cannot emphasize this enough, especially knowing that you are going to be engaging with Black and Brown families that are living in and experiencing poverty and food scarcity within food deserts in Ward 7 and 8. Please listen first. If you have a question, I saw a comment from Gary about I hope I get more information, right? For the client case study of the family. Always look for more information, listen. What you don't know, ask them for more information and do some more learning on your own. We know that it's pro bono, and so though you're not being billed for this work, we hope that your personal desire to engage in this work will lead you to self-learning as well, and not just always relying on your clients. let them lead the way, but also give them the ability to have the space for you to learn on your own, and check your understanding. Check to make sure that the things that you are assuming about your clients are actually true. And if they're not, you're making sure that you are allowing them to lead in dispelling whatever myths you have, removing the barrier of shame and embarrassment from asking them questions, because just as you are an expert in law and legal things, they are the experts in their lives and their experiences. And lastly, accountability is a value word for me. That's why it keeps being said. You want to meet each client in a new way. You want to make sure that you are humbling yourself and your assumptions when you're engaging with them. You want to seek the resources for learning, but you also want to make sure that you are informing your clients of the tools that you are engaging in while talking to them. And you want to call on your mentor. The reason why we make sure that our pro bono attorneys are paired with our mentors is because we understand that you don't do this day in, day out in the same way that they do. And there is no problem and no shame in asking for help. And we want you to be able to grow as much as you are trying to help your clients progress in their own personal matters.
Thank you, Stella. So, you know, as we're nearing the end, this slide is kind of another way of saying what we're saying, right? There's so much about awareness, and I often think about, what does progress look like here? I think if I'm pausing a lot, that's progress. I think the reflection that we've talked about, and the listening and learning and holding ourselves accountable, it can be uncomfortable. I understand doing pro bono work in an area of law that you are not necessarily having an expertise in, you know, and we have mentoring support and all of our training resources and materials around that. And now we're talking about another area that might be uncomfortable, you know. We like to know what we're doing as lawyers and as people, and we're trying to help, and it can be really hard to not know things and get things wrong, but we have to work through that ultimately, because we don't want those things to get in the way and serve as barriers to meeting our clients where they are and ultimately getting the positive outcome that this is all about. We've got some strategies that are going to pop up on this slide. We'll be sending other things out, other materials and resources that'll be posted on our website and shared for those of you joining live. But, you know, you're seeing things on the screen here that we've been covering, and we think about these as strategies. And so taking us just to very brief key takeaways, I think if I were to pick one, I would say everything we're talking about really matters. It really matters for respecting our clients and providing not only culturally humble representation, but really client-centered. Those things may be one and the same as we unpack them, but we think about the legal issues that are impacting family health and education. We've just got to always remind ourselves and do that pausing and reflecting that we're not doing it in a vacuum. You know, systemic racism is underneath all of it. And we've got poverty as the reality for all the clients that we're serving and how that's impacting them in so many different ways. We have trainings we've done about trauma-informed advocacy. That is huge. Disability, there are so many things, and kind of getting back to that intersectionality where we've touched on some things more than others. And so it's all about really considering what matters for the client before you. It's going to be each individual client. And then we have to check ourselves. You do some of this work and make sure when you're kind of working with a new client, you check yourself when you're bringing in something from the last client. Maybe there's something in common, but each client is different and unique in the ways that we've discussed. So we're bringing things together. This is a partnership. My last couple of points here is really about partnering. The attorney is partnering with the client. So I'm bringing my legal expertise, I'm bringing my race, culture, life experiences, the client's bringing their expertise and their lived experience. And, you know, if we combine these things, then that's how we get to positive outcomes. And this is part of the work. So just like you need to know whatever the law is that applies to the case, and going to court if you have a court hearing in the case, and showing up for meetings and doing your investigation, this is integral to our advocacy. It is part and parcel to doing the work. And we are in this together, so we're learning. CLC has grown in this area. We're going to continue to grow. We're partnering with you as pro bono lawyers, and mentoring is a great space to have conversations around this, have some of the hard conversations with us. We welcome it. We want to be there to support one another, all in our mission to support our clients. We represent some of the most incredible children and families in DC. I can't underscore that enough. And so I thank you for partnering with us. I thank you for taking on pro bono, whatever the uncertainty and discomfort might be. And because it is hard, and I'm saying work through that, I also have to say take care of yourself. We all have to take care of ourselves in doing this work. It's important, and we are too. And so I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We will have a survey request that we'd love your feedback, any thoughts that you have. This is a critical area of our work, and we welcome feedback from you. I want to thank Stella again for joining today. If you have questions or are interested in one of our pro bono matters, I'll leave my name up on the screen. You can engage us in the chat if you would like. And so I just want to say thanks again for joining us today and for partnering with Children's Law Center.
Yes, thank you, everyone.